2019. Call the meeting to order. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Thank you for making it through the snow. I hear the traffic's bad already. Okay, so thank you for being here. First item is the approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
I'd make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. We have a second, right?
Second.
Okay. And seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is adopted. Approval of minutes. Next order of business is approval of the minutes from March 27th. Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Public invitation. Do we have anybody that wanted to address the council on matters not on the agenda? I know somebody usually goes and looks at the sheet out there. Has anybody signed up? No? Okay. And I'll just ask, since people are out there, if there's anybody that would like to address the council, you need to sign up, and now is your opportunity. So, all right, thank you. We will move on to our next item, which is a consent agenda item. I hope members have had time to look at the consent agenda items, and can I have a motion to second and approve it?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
been moved and seconded. Motion to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, or any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. So we are moving right along. First, for the reports of standing committees, we will have community development. We will hear from Council Member Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Community Development Committee brings one item forward for consideration today. It's the first comprehensive plan that we have seen. It's for the city of Newport that this iteration of the committee has seen. Newport, the action is to authorize the 2040 comprehensive plan for the city of Newport, and this is a joint business item because Newport is connected to the regional wastewater system. So the Environment Committee has reviewed the comprehensive sewer plan portion. One of the interesting aspects of this plan is the redesignation or the designation of Newport as a suburban community from an urban community. There's geographic reasons and development patterns and the ability to develop and sort of geography that would make it difficult to attain a net density of 10 units per acre for the urban classification. And so this plan conforms to the regional systems plan. It's consistent with council policies. With the proposed amendment to the community designation is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So, Madam Chair, I would move approval of the series of actions related to this item.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Item 2019-60. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. I understand any reports. Councilmember Lindstrom from Environment?
Nothing that, except there's just a couple items on the consent agenda that the committee addressed. And pleased to report that a number of our employees from environmental services received some pretty significant awards recently, which we heard all about at our committee meeting as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And Councilmember Ferguson. On Management Committee, anything to report?
Nothing to report on management.
Thank you. Transportation?
Nothing to report.
Thank you, Councilmember Barber. Other business? Next is an information item on the overview of the Metro Mobility Program presented by our MTS Director, Nick Thompson, and Metro Mobility Senior Manager, Christine Kuhnen. Is that Kennan? Okay. After the council meeting, you're welcome to tour Metro Mobility bus. Now, with the snow, are we still doing that? Mm-hmm. Okay, we are. Okay. Outside the Robert Street building, welcome Nick and Christine.
Madam Chair, council members, thank you for this opportunity to kind of do a deep dive on the Metro Mobility Program. We've withheld this kind of from our overview because we wanted to explain it in quite a bit of detail, because this is something you'll hear as a council member from your constituents. And so we want you to have a good understanding for how this program works and some typical what you will maybe hear about, and so you'll understand the context. And We've also moved the location of the van to down by the garage underneath the protected area, so it's a little better. After this, you'll have an opportunity to go see the bus if you want to at the end of this, but we can answer questions about it here. So with me, Christine, who manages the program on a day-to-day basis and really is leading a lot of our changes that we're implementing, and we'll talk about that and kind of tag team tonight. So we want to start off with is the most basic framework of what Metro Mobility is. This is a public transit service. It's a shared ride public transit service for those riders that we the council, certify are unable to use regular fixed route buses due to their disability.
Mr. Thompson, I just want to tell the members that Liz will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, she's going to make the list, okay? And so what we'd like to do, though, I think, is get through the presentation, and then we'll take questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
So it's a disability that's certified through our process, and that maybe they cannot use fixed route buses at any time, or the condition of their disability maybe at certain times they cannot use fixed route. It is under the Americans with Disability Right, a civil right offered to those with the disability, regulated both by federal transit area on the FTA side, and we're going to talk in detail about it's really two phases. It's a federal and a state program. But in Minnesota, for years, we've had a much broader extent to a service area and a service model for those with disabilities. Something we can be proud of as a region and as a state for providing this beyond even what federal requirements are and expanding that service. And so it's also a service that is for mobility for customers, that they can use it for any purpose. There's no regulation about the trip purpose. It's really so that they have some freedom and mobility in their life. It is a program with a long history that is started in the 70s. In our region, we had a mobility program way before the federal ADA law was passed. We've highlighted on this chart a few key things that really have shaped where we're at today. It started as a small pilot program for those with disabilities, grew into what has been called since 1979 Metro Mobility. In 1990, there's really when at the national scale, the ADA law was passed that really changed for the country how transportation is provided for those with disabilities. In Minnesota, since we had a good footprint, we didn't have too many changes in general, but it did redefine some of our performance metrics, how we provided some of the guarantees, and then a little bit how the service would change over time. We tried to go to a model of we'll talk about our model, but it's contracted out. We've had some hiccups in that process. It's a system that at one point was run by the National Guard because in 1993 we had tried to go to a new system and it failed completely. And because it is an important and critical service, the governor called out the National Guard to operate it for a while. So it really points to how important this service is deemed at the state level. We began the model that we're going to talk a lot about tonight in 1994, where we have this model of service and division of duties between council staff and our contractors. In 2006, like we are today, the state was facing some major budget pressures. The council was facing budget pressures, and there's a consideration for shrinking the footprint of the Metro Mobility area to just that was required by federal law as a way to cut the cost of the service. But the state legislature unanimously passed a bill that said your footprint is the footprint of service that exists in 2006. And that was really the boundaries of a transit taxing district at that time. And so that showed their commitment for the service and supplying funding for that service too. That 2006 boundary is still in place today. There are 5 communities in our region that have added to the transit taxing district since that time. Lakeville, Ramsey, Maple Plain, Columbus, and Forest Lake have been added, but we do not provide service to them because of the way the state law was written that kind of froze us in a footprint in 2006. The legislature is debating expanding the service to those 5 cities in a couple different bills this year. In 2015 is really where we redefine the service based on how we contract it out, who our providers are, what technology, how we use it, and simplified the service and made some important changes to the customers we'll talk about. And that's the model we really have in place today. So we divided over 4 main contracts. in service areas in that tax district.
So Nick's discussion really set up this slide, which is kind of to define what are the two distinct service areas for Metro Mobility. What we call the ADA service area, these are internal names, ADA service area and the non-ADA service area. But what we call the ADA service area is shown there in blue. And then the non-ADA is in the gray, and that's the area that's codified in 2006 as the entirety of our service area. But really the rules that most specifically define how we operate are all within that ADA service area. It's mandated service. It is tied directly to the service of the fixed route, Metro Transit fixed route service plan. It requires that we provide service within 3/4 of a mile of anywhere a regular route bus or rail goes, and within similar service hours. So everything that we provide on a daily basis kind of tied to that requirement. It is, as Nick said, guaranteed as a civil right that any trip that is within an origin and destination, as any part within that ADA service area is guaranteed. And it is subject to the service criteria, or the service performance criteria, is subject to constraints that are defined by the FTA as well. We must meet high levels of service performance for all trips within that area as well. And then no trip denials are allowed. So every single trip is guaranteed. In the non-ADA service area, which is about 1/3 of our trips, the requests are placed on standby because the operators or the providers are allowed to take those trip requests and fit them into the service day based on their operating capacity. And as our system has grown, we've had to look at that very closely. And in 2016, in the fall of 2016, we started to deny some trips that were requested in the non-ADA area, simply because we did not have the capacity to provide the ADA trips to the levels that were required. And so we've been looking at reducing that. They're currently a very small percentage. It's less than 1% of the ride requests in the non-ADA that are denied, but it is something that we are looking at. So this slide kind of goes through the regulatory requirements that define the service, both in the ADA federal mandate and the state mandate. Basically, like I described, we have to comply with a system that's comparable to regular route. The certification is that the customers must not be able to use a regular route most of the time. The service area is 3/4 miles around the regular route. Service level is curb to curb or door through door by federal mandate, but the state requires or suggests a door through door service, so that's what we provide. Drivers will meet the customer at their door, take them to their destination, and then escort them from the van to the door of their destination as well. Trips are requested in advance. The federal requirement is 1 to 14 days, but we allow only 1 to 4 days. Scheduling is within 1 hour on either side of the requested time. That's a negotiated schedule. It allows our providers to fit the trip request into their service day as best as possible. In the ADA area, that is defined at the time of the call. And again, in the non-ADA area, the trip request is put on standby and later determined. There is no restriction and no prioritization allowed by federal law for the ADA area, and we apply that rule across our whole system. So it doesn't matter if a customer is going to the grocery store or a medical appointment, all trips are treated equally. From a program compliance standpoint, there are further rules that are defined by both federal and state law. For example, we have to have an equal response time for rides that require accessible or a lift service. Our contractors are required to follow FTA rules, same as Metro Transit, for pre-employment drug and alcohol testing, reasonable suspicion testing, criminal records review, BVS records check, and that sort of thing. They also are put to a high level of disability awareness training, and by state law, they hold the risk, and there's counsel indemnification for that risk. This is the organizational structure of our division. We have, as Nick mentioned, a structure where we contract out all our operations and fleet maintenance, reservations and dispatch. It's decentralized, so each contractor has their own reservations and their own dispatch center. Cost for service operations is based on the number of revenue hours that are performed, so that fluctuates on a monthly basis or can fluctuate on a monthly basis per contract depending on how much service is delivered that month. And then the service performance that we hold them accountable to in their contract is defined, and for things like on-time performance, how long a customer can be on board, and whether appointment times are arrived on time, that sort of thing. The Metro Mobility Service Center here at Robert Street, first floor right by the security desk, is where we do all the program and contract administration. We have a call center there. Staff there also conducts all the certifications and eligibility for our program. They issue the go-to cards and take photos and process ID cards for our customers. We also have the emergency backup center, radio center, and call center. So if there's an emergency at any one of our contractors, that staff can come down here at Robert Street and perform the backup function.
So looking at the scale of the system, looking back to 2018, roughly operating budget last year of $65.5 million. This is all state funded. We do not have federal funds that go into this, so state general fund. And if you've absorbed in our budget presentations some of the state funding for the council, our base budget is roughly $89.9 million. And so Metro Mobility is using a vast majority of the state general fund and is projected to exceed that within the next few years, the base budget, which is driving some of the governor's proposals and some of that at the state level. It is a system that continues to grow, a 30% growth in the last 5 years. We see 6 to 9% ridership growth almost continuously every year. We don't see a slowdown. We don't expect a slowdown in that based on our demographic models and our population growth. We expect that growth to continue, and we meet that growth. So as the demand grows, we meet it. Roughly 62,000 certified customers in our system. About 26,000 of those use the system at any given point last year. And you can see our fleet size. It's the largest majority of the fleet within the MTS fleet. It's getting near comparable to the number of buses in Metro Transit, and we're adding 60 to 70 buses per year to that based on our growth. This is the most expensive service that the council provides on a per ride basis. Subsidy last year was over $28. Compare that to local bus of I think around $3 per ride. Subsidy is occurring on that. But it is also, if you were to compare this to nationally, I think the last time we looking at peers, we had the second lowest subsidy per ride of any of our comparable system. These ADA services are provided in anywhere that there's fixed route transit, and so it's good that we can compare. Though it's most expensive, we are proud of the efficiency we have built into the system because of to help manage this growth. One of the key things that drive it is how long the trips are. A typical rider probably averages maybe 2 trips per hour based on the length and the time it takes to escort them. And so it's a very different service model versus a fixed route bus. But this is one that, this system will grow at that cost. And so really thinking through how to continue to make it efficient, make changes to meet customer needs, but also kind of talk about the need to grow the budget in this too.
So as Mick mentioned earlier, our customer profile is really anybody who is certified. They can use the system for any reason, and they do. Just imagine if anyone walks up to a fixed route bus stop, that's the kind of customer that's using Metro Mobility. Mick mentioned we had 26,000 individuals served over the past year. We take about 800 new applications for certification every month. Of those, about 62% are new customers. We do ask, most of our customers need to be recertified every 4 years. There are some customers that get permanent eligibility based on their disability, but most customers are getting recertified every 4 years. But last year we took in, of our applications, about 62% of them were all new customers. About 26% of them are certified with some sort of conditional eligibility, which means they can use fixed route some of the time. But while we certify them for conditional eligibility, we do not enforce that conditional eligibility. Basically, if you're certified on Metro Mobility, you can take a ride at any time. About 40% are eligible, we estimate, for waivered services, and about 30% of our customers or our trips require the use of a lift. 10.48 mile average trip length, so most of our trips are quite long compared to a short jaunt that someone might take on a fixed route bus. And we do allow our customers to invite guests and personal care attendants to ride along with them. PCAs are free and guests are a paid fare.
Can you explain the waivered service, what that means?
Yeah.
So these are, Madam Chair, these are the medical assistance or waivered service through DHS, and so part of their fare might be reimbursed, though we are not, and so the fare is being paid. We do not know whether, we're not collecting that as a waivered service federal fare, though it's usually managed through the counties. And that's one of the ones that we're considering a bill where we're trying to share our data with DHS, because we think there is an opportunity. If we can identify the trips that are waivered services, we can maybe recapture half of that fare from a federal reimbursement. And that's why it's important. That's an estimate, because we are not allowed to ask the customers currently if they are qualify for medical assistance. But based on the estimates from we're able to do through county processes, we have a good estimate around that fare. So that's for a medical trip of some sort.
Thank you.
This slide kind of talks about our main service contracts. We have 4 main service contracts. We have 3 that we call our demand contracts, and that's the vast majority of our trips. About 83% of our total trips are on this system. We have 3 service zones, west, east, and south. Those are 5-year terms of contract, with 5th year expiring in 2020. So we're actually we're working to prepare scope of work for an RFP to be released later this year for our demand system. These are the trips that are the requested 1 to 4 days in advance. Typical requests for trips are through on our demand contractors. The west zone is provided by Transit Team. The south and east zones, the yellow and the gray there, are by First Transit. We do also have an agency contract. This is a contract that combines, for a purpose of efficiency, groups of rides that are going from their homes to large day training and rehabilitation centers or adult daycare centers, where customers are picked up. Maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 customers are picked up and then brought to the same location in the morning and then brought home again in the afternoon. So typical, like a school bus kind of routing as far as the structure of the routes. We provide about 320,000 rides a year on that. We did redesign this contract last year, or redesigned the service under this contract last year. Previously, we had some agencies in the non-ADA area and some smaller agencies that were kind of drawing from some of the efficiency of the program. And so now we have consolidated that to just the ADA footprint, and we serve the 12 largest agencies in the region under this contract. It's a 5-year term as well, so that will expire in 2023, and that is held by Transit Team. We do also have alternative service contracts or options for our customers. The Premium on Demand program, it's also called Premium Same Day program, was an opt-in service that was begun in 2004. It's a taxi contract held by Transportation Plus. It's a contract whose term will also end in 2020. Basically, it's available to any of our certified customers. They can request a ride through their provider, get a certification or an ID, and then they can use that to call our taxi provider, book a ride, And with that match of that eligibility, the council will pay up to $15 for that ride. So the fare model is the customer will pay the first $5 of the taxi trip, council will pay the next 15, and then any cost over $20 of the trip, the customer then would pay the remainder. This is a good option for a number of our customers, but of course we're aware that many of our customers would not really be able to have a non-escorted curb-to-curb taxi provision. It's really a ride it's just simply a subsidized ride. They are delivered typical to any taxi trip. It's curb-to-curb service and subject to the rules and regulations of the taxi industry. We had just recently a service change where we've let a contract expire for what we call the peak demand overflow or supplemental service contract. This was an option for customers who had been denied trips in a non-ADA area on the main system. They could call this other provider and get a subsidized ride, but have very low ridership, just about 3,000 trips annually, and we have been working fairly aggressively to decrease our denial rate. We have a 30% reduction in our denial rate in 2018 compared to 2017. It's less than 1% of our trips. It affected just a dozen, 15 riders that were using the service extensively, and we've worked to make sure that those customers are getting served as consistently as possible on the main system. So we did let those contracts expire. The next slide goes to our fleet profile. So if you want to tour after the meeting today, we'll have one of the cutaway buses in the garage. That's a vast majority of our fleet, 616 of those. We do have 31 sedans, and those are really for customers whose disability prevents them from riding a regular bus, and they need more of the sedan kind of ride. And so we do offer that option as an accommodation. The fleet is council-owned. We do have a fleet department that maintains the oversight of the contractors' maintenance programs. Average bus cost is about $3,000, and we have a budgeted spare factor of 10% that typically serves our needs. They're retired after about 250,000 miles or after 5 years is our fleet plan. Onboard Technology is very similar to what you would find on a regular route bus. We have an onboard mobile computer that gives the information to the driver. We have a Kpis pass scheduling system. We have onboard cameras, onboard fare collection system, a GPS tracking system, and our radio system is part of the state network. So I'll rest a little bit on this slide because I think it's important to understand the customer experience in the booking process and how that might lead to some concerns or confusions maybe in how the service is delivered or the decisions that are made at the contractor level about expectations or about the booking or the scheduling of the ride. So I mentioned it's a 1 to 4 day advance booking requirement. And we don't go beyond 4 days because in our typical experience, and other agencies as well, say that if you really go beyond that 4 days, your cancellation rate goes up, and people really don't plan that far in advance, and that can become inefficient. So we've had that 1 to 4 day model for quite some time. We do take quite a number of monthly reservations, about 236,000 a month. And the reservations are negotiated. So a customer might say they want to be at an appointment by 11, and so that's fixed. But the negotiation might be around when they can be picked up. And the schedulers of the reservationists will give some options that the system will present the reservationists and then try to fit it into the customer's desires or needs. But it's all based around what the demand and the numbers of requests that are going into the system that day and what can really be reasonably achieved with the numbers of resources, operators, and vehicles that they have in the system. So they do negotiate it. In the ADA area, that's done at the time of call. So once that's fixed, that is the trip time that is expected, and we measure our performance against. And negotiate can also be around what time a customer wants to be picked up if they don't have an arrival time in mind. But so maybe they want to go somewhere at 11 o'clock. The reservationist might say, will 11:30 work, or 11:15 work, or 11:45 work, because that's what the system is saying is the most optimal from an operating standpoint. And so that is negotiated at the time of the call. Then the once that's in the system and is put out same day, all those ride details as far as what that time is, what the constraint is as far as an appointment time, if there's a certain door that they want to be picked up at, front door, back door, or any details that would help guide the driver for that customer in the manifest. If the customer has any need for a mobility device or service animal or a PCA or a guest riding along, those details are also put in the system at the time. It is important that the reservation gets accurate, whether the trip is an ADA trip or a non-ADA trip. And we have polygons in our system that define the service area map. All of the addresses are maintained within that, so that when the ride request is put in with the origin and destination fitting in the ADA area, that is flagged as ADA and is then a mandatory, cannot be denied, cannot be adjusted kind of trip. And then the non-ADA, again, is put on standby. And the customer is then called back with a confirmation that their trip has been confirmed. Or if the contractor wants to deny or adjust, there's a callback where that conversation occurs. From a service expectation standpoint, I'll tell you a story. You know, I came from a fixed route. For my history is 25 years over at Metro Transit. And I came over to paratransit, Metro Mobility, and it really surprised me that there would be a 30-minute window for an on-time performance threshold on paratransit, and whereas there's a 5-minute window on fixed route. And I think that's important to understand the reasoning for that. It's very industry standard, and it's because the boarding times are so volatile. There's so many cancellations, late cancels, no-shows. Every route is adjusted several times before it's delivered. And there needs to really be some window of time that allows operations and dispatch to make adjustments same day. Yesterday we had about 10,000 pre-day bookings for today. And as of about half an hour before the meeting today, about 1,600 of them had been canceled. So yesterday they created a service plan, you know, a 9,000 to 10,000 trip service plan on the fly. And then today they had to adjust it. And so that window allows for a reasonable on-time performance threshold that meets both the providers and the customer's needs. So it was just an interesting change for me to get my head around that 30-minute. But I think it goes to a customer experience standpoint. The expectation of on time, typically none of us would think 30 minutes late is on time. And so that is I think of a frequent point of conversation with customers when we're talking about complaints for late service, where there's an education process about what the parameters really are, and that is standard in paratransit around the country. We do hold our customers to some service expectations as well around no-shows and late cancels. We do have what I guess you'd call a progressive discipline policy for successive or excessive no-shows, excessive late cancels, and that is to protect the viability of our routings and make sure that we're not sending resources and buses to a location where the customer no longer needs the ride. Here's a slide that really talks about our service center. We have a call center of 5 customer service representatives here at Robert Street. That's to take questions, complaints, and process applications. We take about 490 calls per weekday. We're only open Monday through Friday from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And so that is something that we're looking at right now because our call volume is starting to grow and our hold times are starting to increase. But they do work off the phones as well, go-to card processing and photo ID processing. And they also do, they're the start of the complaint investigation. So they will do some research into a complaint, look at where the trip bus was, what the reservation asked for, They'll do some basic information investigation, and then they'll send the complaint to the contractor to respond. And then when the contractor responds to the complaint with their own investigation, it gets sent back to the customer service center, who will do a final review of the complaint and determine whether or not to hold that contractor accountable for that complaint or not. We do have thresholds that say the contractor can't have more than one complaint per 1,000 rides. We do have administrative processes around certifications and eligibility assessments as well. We have 2 assessment rooms, and each day we have 5 to 8 assessments take place, where if their application doesn't make their eligibility obvious, we will invite the customer or the prospective customer to come into our center and do an in-person physical assessment of their eligibility. Customers do have rights to appeal if they did not get the eligibility that they expected, and they also have rights to appeal no-show designations and other sort of kind of disciplinary action related to that. This slide goes to some of our KPIs that I mentioned earlier, some of the on-time performance. We do have ridership increase that stresses that, but I am pleased that in 2018 over 2017, we have been able to make improvements in each of our on-time performance areas. Our council goals do exceed FTA thresholds. FTA minimums around on-time performance are that 90% of trips have to be picked up within 30 minutes of the negotiated time. Our appointments are, the threshold is the trip bus cannot be more than 1 minute late and can't arrive more than 60 minutes early. And the threshold around that is 95%, and 90%, and onboard times, the threshold is that it has to be comparable to fixed route. So basically the system performs a calculation of origin to destination, makes a comparison to how long that trip would take on a fixed route bus, and then that is the base for an onboard time calculation. And so we hold our contractors accountable to all 3 of those. We do have a pretty extensive customer outreach and engagement program. I'm pleased to invite you all to our next community conversation, which is next Wednesday at Creekside Community Center in Bloomington. But this is where we have, we invite our customers, advocates, stakeholders, and just any interested member of the public to come and have a conversation with us about our service. It's well organized. We have moderators at each table. Personally, I've learned a lot about what our system means to our region, and some of the kind of the hardships that I see when looking at numbers and what that translates to from a personal experience standpoint. We have social media and newsletters. Obviously, we actually published a newsletter just a couple weeks ago. And just this last year, we've tried to increase our subscriptions to our GovDelivery emails. So we have, I think, 8,000 or 9,000 people on that distribution now. So anytime we want to get information out to customers quickly, like weather alerts, we can use that subscription, and it's been effective. Some of our stakeholders and key partners are listed here. Obviously, the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee is very important to us, and we have a close relationship with them, meeting regularly, as well as the monthly meeting. The Minnesota State Council on Disabilities participated in our agency contract solicitation last year. Obviously, the agency programs are key customers for us within that contract. Leading Age Minnesota partnered with us on some of the outreach that we performed and education we performed around the changes to the agency contract last year. The ARC helped us with a driver training video where their self-advocacy advisory committee participated in a video that we presented and delivered to our contractors for driver training. And we've done the same with the Deafblind Services Minnesota around how to best serve customers with that type of disability.
So in 2017, one of the bills passed legislatively was to designate a task force to look at how we provide the Metro Mobility Service model. Councilmember Barber represented the council on that. We had members, county commissioner from each of the 7 counties. We had nonprofit organizations that are involved in disabilities. We had providers like taxi services, the traffic transportation network companies, and other interested parties that participated in that. The driving force from the legislature was a couple things. Number one, that chart with the budget increasing continuously for ask for more and more general funds was concerning to them, and wanted to make sure that we were for sure designing the system as efficiently as we could. They would also, like you will, they would hear concerns from their constituents about the service, and they wanted to understand if we're providing the service as best we could to minimize costs, but also provide the service that is needed for these customers. So that task force unanimously approved recommendations, and some of which we'll talk about today and that we're moving forward on. But really, a lot of it was on the service side, looking at what are some same-day models that we can provide in addition to what we already do with taxi services. You know, can this Uber and Lyft model work within this, along with our other model? And they really looked at the potential for that. They looked at different technologies. One of them was really thinking about how we do dispatching and booking. Right now, it's distributed to each contractor. There's recommendations that we look at centralizing that service, and so we're pursuing looking into that. Really, some of the flexibility around trips they asked us to do, but really, I think they also recommended that it is being dealt with efficiently, especially when they presented information about the cost of the service relative to our peers. And so they really thought that they recommended strongly that if anything, the service should grow to meet the needs and expand even more choices for that. And that was some strong recommendations that were provided to the legislature. The last one is that, there are opportunity to possibly bring federal funds into this system through reimbursements. And so I think that task force's drive to, support that, and it really requires some data sharing with DHS as step one, has really propelled that legislation forward, and I think it seems to have some bipartisan support. It passed last year, but then was in a bill that was vetoed. This year, it seems to be going through smoothly again, and we're hoping that passes and allows us to start working more closely with DHS and possibly relieve some of the budget pressure by bringing some federal funding into the cost of the budget of this.
So we have been working hard on making some technology improvements and investing in that. Last summer, we had a version upgrade for our Kpis software system. That was a planned upgrade anyway, but it did allow us to have a little bit more of a stable and optimal scheduling and routing system. We put in we laid in a new architecture for our network that allowed better resiliency and redundancy that will support continuity of operation requirements. There was, of course, a well-publicized failure of technology on January 4th where a server switch at Minute failed and took out not only the communication to our Kpis scheduling system that our service relies on, but also our phones, our web services. Without going into intricate detail because that's not my not my line of work, but the full setting in of that redundancy of that architecture hadn't yet taken place. That has since been taken place and tested, as well as the hardware failure of that network switch has been replaced. And so we're confident that we have much more resilient and redundant architecture and system now than we did in early January. We also have increased our staff support and our onboard technology, as well as to support the administration of the Kpis pass system. We have been working hard with our vendor, Kpis, to put out an online booking application. It is in final test stage right now, where instead of having to call a reservationist, they can book a ride on their smartphone. We will guarantee and allow that booking to take place in place of a call to the reservationist for anyone who's in the ADA area. If they attempt to book a ride online in the non-ADA area, a message would just tell them that the ride is on standby and then they need to call to get that scheduled. but we think that will be a huge advancement for our customers and hopefully take some pressure off of those wait times and call hold times that are on our phones. It also will, this version of the application also has kind of vehicle tracking. So similar to when you call up an Uber or a Lyft, you can see how close your car is to you. The similar function is on this application for, they'd be able to see how close the bus is to them. We also have a couple other modules, a trip broker that would allow our our taxi requests to pass through from our Kpis system all the way through to delivery and the taxi provider so that we can have a little bit closer oversight to that taxi provision. And then we're also piloting a tablet installation instead of the onboard mobile computers to take on that software, and that will allow us to have some real-time mapping, Google Maps kind of function, so live traffic disruptions, that sort of thing can come through on that software on a tablet installation as opposed to what we currently have now, which is more legacy and doesn't have that kind of feature. Nick mentioned one of the key recommendations of the task force was to look at options for our customers, especially those customers in the non-ADA area or customers who have alternatives. Being aware that a good majority of our customers really don't have an option other than full service ADA paratransit, door-through-door escort. But there are a number of our customers that do have options to take alternatives, including the fixed route. So we have piloted and going to be continuing the program, in fact, for a set number of about 82 customers that were invited to try out the fixed route system with a free ride option. They were provided customer skills training or training on how to use the fixed route network. Metro Transit partnered with us with that, and we did some follow-up surveys to find out what kind of barriers they were facing, experiences that they had when they rode the fixed route. We found that to be quite successful, and so we're going to be continuing that, as well as asking for more customers to be involved in that pilot. And then we are preparing to go out with a request for proposal later this spring for a supplement to our premium on-demand model, looking for that ride-hailing on-demand kind of service. We hope that the Uber, the Lyfts, and others in the industry will bid on that. We'll be offering it to all our customers, including those that will require a Lyft trip. Currently, the market with Lyft and Uber don't plan to bring that kind of accessible fleet to their own model, but we will still be offering it as part of the program, and we'll have an option in the proposal process to provide the technology that could be installed in perhaps our own fleet, that where our own contractors and buses could provide that accessible on-demand trip if there wasn't capacity in the taxi or the TNC service to do that. I should mention, and I do want to, the map that you see, the map of the red and blue dots, that is a mapping of Metro Mobility rides in 2018 that Strategic Initiatives Department at Metro Transit is analyzing for us to try to look at high boarding locations for customers that might have the capacity to use the fixed route, so that they can use that in their planning to improve the maybe some of the facilities, the accessibility of facilities, and other wayfinding signage and that sort of thing at some of those high boarding locations, so that we can, make at least our fixed route system most ready for Metro Mobility customers who can use them. And then this closes just with a nice slide of why we do what we do, what gets us up every day. And that is, when you talk with our customers, it really is striking how important the service we provide is to their daily lives. I think that without us, a number of our customers wouldn't be able to go to even to the grocery store, drugstore, go to a restaurant, or to their medical provider easily at all, and be homebound perhaps. So it's really important to us that we recognize that every day. We think about it as we talk about our service. And then also, I love the quote from the driver down there on the bottom, because, you know, when we're trying to recruit for drivers to our system, we can't really say you're gonna be rich if you become a bus driver for Metro Mobility. But what we can do is kind of tap into that volunteer spirit and say this is the job that is more than meets the eye, and you'll take home, you know, that understanding at the end of each day.
So that concludes our presentation. I'll just add to that last slide too. I think I saw recently that this is a service that is enabled as a region, you know, those with disabilities to seek gainful employment. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates of those with disabilities in the country. And I think having good transportation has been a key to that. And I think this model is one, just as a highlight, is one of the keys to, you know, to giving those opportunities to jobs, to school, medical, and just day-to-day life. So we're happy to take all your questions.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. We have a couple people on the list, and anybody else want to get on the list? Yeah, so on this side was Linnea and Molly. Okay. Okay. Councilmember Lee.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to you both for the presentation. My comment is both a question and a concern too. I'm the liaison to the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I was at the last meeting last Wednesday. I see that the minutes are not up yet. At the end of that meeting, at the public comments section, a gentleman in a wheelchair came up and he said that he had a ride not show up, and he was not informed until 3 hours after the fact. And the staff took his name down, and he left quickly. And if you could please speak to how we loop back with folks like that, and if that in that particular incident, if you could please connect back with staff, because I don't want the perception to be up there that folks who are less able-bodied or able-minded than us receive any less professional service, both as a service and as a customer service. And the riding public is not just the riding public and our clients and our customers, but at the end of the day, they also write our performance reviews in many ways. And if you could please address how we kind of loop back to customers in that particular incident. And also, I'm sorry if I seem a little passionate, but in another life, I was the constituent service director for Mayor Coleman, and so customer service is dear to my heart. Thank you.
Ms. Can.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilmember Lees. So our process to respond to customer concerns are that we have to that we will respond to them within 2 days of with a resolution or at least a finding. So I'm hopeful that that concern that was brought to you after the TAC meeting was processed in the same way. We do get complaints. You know, I'll get them, other staff will get them outside of the structure of the call center. And when we receive them, we want to take that, enter it into the system so that it gets tracked and responded in the same way. So hopefully that's been done, and I can follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could, I'd offer that, you know, if you receive a complaint from a customer and they want follow-up, you can just forward to Christine, and we'll follow that process. But I anticipate that you'll receive individual complaints via email and phone too, and as soon as we can get those, we can begin the investigation.
Right, and just to add to that, it is important to me that it doesn't stay outside the typical tracking system. We do want to make sure that all our concerns are tracked because, of course, as I mentioned, we do hold our contractors accountable to the number of complaints, and we need that in the central system.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize if you mentioned this during your presentation, but talk to me about price. So if someone gets a ride and they're picked up in Kpis and they're going to Stillwater, what's the price for that? And is it variable? Is it a fixed price?
Thank
Ms.
you, Madam
Gannon?
Chair, Councilmember. It is a fixed price. The length of the trip doesn't matter. It is similar to fixed route. It's based on time of day. So we have a peak service fare and an off-peak service fare. I think it's 450 and 350.
350 for the off-peak, 450 peak. And then we do have for those non-88 trips, for trips longer than 15 miles.
Yes,
so
thank you.
The Shakopee to Stillwater example will add 75 cents for that trip. And most of them, most trips are not that in terms of having that extra add-on.
Thank you for that correction.
Thank you.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just wanted to say I have my mother-in-law lives with us, and she it's been huge for our family as we're a youngish family to be able to have Metro Mobility. It's meant she could go places during the day that we couldn't take her, both working. So I just want to say that it's an incredibly important service and made a challenging situation a little bit easier. And so I know a lot of people benefit from it. And she's very grateful. So I don't know if you guys get to hear that a lot. So she's very grateful of it. She's also very, and I'm curious about this, that for her trips, it's often a 4-hour window of time that she's planning to where she's going to. She's a quilter, so she goes to quilting things, which is nice for her to do in her retirement. But it is a huge block of time that she takes out just for a trip that would take us in a car or maybe even on a bus a third or a fourth of the time. And so I just wonder about, or just to maybe even, I have no idea what the solution is, and I don't know that anyone does know, but to not other those who are reliant upon this type of support and saying their time is less valuable. And so I just want to communicate support for whatever efforts need to be there to get adequate funding and support. So if you need someone to testify, I guess, I don't know where the places are to offer that support, encouragement. I realize I don't know if unfunded mandate is the right word, but something along those lines.
Mr. Thompson.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, it is currently funded, but we definitely have that pressure going forward that the projected cost is to exceed our current base.
Got it.
So we've been advocating for meeting that need, and that window of time is a real factor on cost. And so we do definitely hear that, but we know that if we were to, we're meeting the targets, performance targets, but for an individual customer, that can be a burden because that is a long time, that especially with the pickup windows and scheduling their rides. And so trying to find a fit within there that like guaranteed what time your mother or mother-in-law wants to be. There's different options on being there in time, but maybe the premium same day might be an option on some of those cases too, where those trip times can be shorter on those because those are individual trips point to point without a shared ride. So we're not encouraging a lot of non-shared rides as a transit agency. So there's different options, but we should be honest that if we were going to shrink the time on board, there's a direct relationship to cost. So we want to be transparent in that fact.
I realize that, Chair, that there's a lot of things to balance there in impact on environment and trips and also quality of life and treating all riders as equal as possible. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just add to that,
Ms. Keenan.
because your comment reminds me that, one of our most common complaints is a customer doesn't understand why, if they're so close to their destination, why they had to get an add-on last minute. The driver will say, I have an add-on, I have to go over here first. That might seem not efficient from the customer's standpoint when they're on the bus, and it even might seem not efficient from the driver's standpoint because they're just seeing their own world. But in dispatch, what they're doing is they're trying to balance all of these constraints, and they're seeing that another bus might be late to another customer, and they can't have that other trip be late, so they have to reroute on the fly and go pick up the customer in order to have both trip times met within the threshold, so that those 30-minute windows do get pushed, those onboard times do get pushed when we have high ridership days.
Thank you. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you. Was wondering if we collect or if we have data regarding the demographics of the users, especially then regarding limited English speakers by race, ethnicity, things like that.
Stan?
Madam Chair, Council Member, I don't believe we track that kind of information at certification level.
Mr.
Madam Chair,
Johnson?
we do have some statistics on age, but that is probably the one demographic that we do, and that we have that from some surveys and others, but that's the limit that we have for what we are allowed to collect.
Do you have any, if I may,
Councilmember Gonzalez, follow up?
you might have some anecdotal information as to whether there's a underutilization of the services by demographics, especially thinking since the way to get the right is to call. So limited English speakers might, just from the start, will have a disadvantage. I did notice that you have the services of the language line, and there's some information in Spanish, Hmong, and Somali, which my suggestion, by the way, would be to make it larger font and put it at the top of the page, not at the bottom. But since that's a barrier, I was just wondering if you've seen or if you think that there might be an issue there.
Ms. Keenan?
Madam Chair, Council Member, I can't say I have anecdotal information to share with that. It's my experience that our customer base largely reflects the region.
Okay.
And we have had concerns and pressures on us for language line. And, last year we offered options for alternative languages on our website. And I had some feedback from the Minnesota Deafblind Minnesota that the Somali community in particular was wanting to make sure they had a better access. And so that's my general anecdotal experience with that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings?
Madam Chair, thank you. Can you speak a little bit more to what is driving the increase? Is it increase in the population in the region, increase of seniors, increase of those who certify, all of the above? What's driving that?
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Thompson.
Council Member, I would say number one driver is population increase. There's just as for every 1,000 residents we add, there's a certain percentage of those with a disability that would be certified. Demographically, we have a larger population of older users, but they use it less. So the younger population uses the service more frequently, typically working age and education age, and so those two demographics by population, if you have growing elderly base, we're going to expect more residents that become certified. As age is not a condition of certification at all, but they use it less, and so trying to understand that balance between how big our pool is of the ones that are using more frequently. I think, but the biggest driver overall is just the number of people living in that area is increasing. That's driving. And with that will come more customers from that have a disability.
Okay. Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate getting, of course, the updates that we get from our government affairs team, because it ties directly into this critical service that's mandated. And I just wonder too, with some of the proposals or the proposal in the Senate right now to expand Metro Mobility into Lakeville, Ramsey, Maple Plain, Forest Lake, and Columbus. The question I guess I have is that the ADA service or the non-ADA service? And I know it's just a proposal and these are critical services, so I'm not saying that we don't expand, but I'm just trying to understand how do we interface with those proposals as they start to come online? Because I would imagine it's quite something that you'd really have to work into that system, because you're still trying to meet all of the requirements for service and the levels of service, and it's a system's impact, not just financially, although that's a critical issue for all of us, but also to the customer. So as system mandates come to us as far as expansion, how do we manage to that?
Mr. Thompson?
Madam Chair, Council Member, so that expansion of that service area has been in several different bills at the House and Senate this year, and so in each time it's heard, we are testifying about its impact, and the authors have been willing to listen to us about if it does get approved, giving us enough time to add fleet, add drivers, be able to market that service. So they, in the framework, they're services that we can add, and they've been set up in a way that we think we can do it in the right time. But we've also, in all of these, attached a fiscal impact to them. And we've really wanted to talk about that. Yes, we can provide this service, but here's the estimated cost. Some of the bills are attaching a budget with them and some are not. And so that is one of the concerns we're expressing. There's other things that do impact us. So FTA may change a requirement that has a big impact on our service. And so we are often kind of trying to communicate and understand the budget impact of that, but also using our communication models to communicate with customers about maybe some change that they need to know about. Those various ones, but those expansion of service area is probably one of the big ones this year that we're tracking very closely and testifying whenever it comes up so that they truly understand the impact and how work should they pass it.
Ms. Keenan?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, and to answer your question about whether this would be ADA or non-ADA, these would all be non-ADA area service expansions. And so I think it's really important to frame that in context of the stress of a growing service within the ADA. So just if the service expands without commensurate funding, we'd be looking at increased denials in the non-ADA area. They'd be potentially stressing that system on the non-ADA side because we still have to meet the growing demand on the ADA side.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up here. Just, Mr. Thompson, can you explain about the funding of Metro Mobility and what happens when it grows? And so I've been testifying on this, right? So I guess if I can explain it, if that's all right. Just so you know how it works is right now Metro Mobility, bus, and LRT and all our funding is in one pool. So as this service grows over here, it's taking the funding away from these other things. And virtually what could happen is it's going to decrease our bus service. I mean, there's just no question about that. So what the legislative request is to take Metro Mobility and put it in its separate funding stream and then keep the other ones there. And then that actually frees these up to grow and there's funding there that should be going to them that's going to Metro Mobility instead. So it would benefit both. But so far the Senate was not open to that proposal. The House,
Madam Chair, the House did include that, though I do not believe they set aside sufficient budget for just the Metro Mobility, but a majority of it. But they did create a separate budget in their proposal for Metro Mobility.
so if you're talking to your legislators, you know, that is what we want to emphasize is Metro Mobility needs its own budget line, everything else. Otherwise, they play off each other and it actually take some money for everything else. And then, as you all know, we have people call us, I'm sure they call you like they call me, and they say, what about that route to Century College? And what about that one to Cottage Grove? And then we have a process for that. That's one thing. But we won't be able to expand any routes. We'll be shrinking them potentially. So Councilmember Lindstrom.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Or also you hear, how come there isn't any route in the first place? So thanks for letting us know about the customer experience forum that's coming up, and thanks for the invitation to that. And I'm curious, how often do you put on these forums? And it'd be great to know about any upcoming forums in our general areas.
Yeah.
Ms. Keenan.
Madam Chair, Council Member, we do the large invitation forums twice a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. I'm very open to do more if we have the capacity for it, to organize around it. But these are extensive invitations. They're well attended. And I think quarterly would be the most we could do. Right now we do twice a year.
And Madam Chair, if I could, we try to stagger them. So one is either Minneapolis, St. Paul, one is a suburban, both of which can have good service for Metro Mobility, and then one during the day, one in the evening. So try to make sure, and then really talk to the customers that this is ongoing. So these will occur every year, and so that they have the flexibility to know that there's an opportunity to attend one.
Thank you.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just want to Ditto of the importance of understanding demographic information. You guys are probably going to get tired of me saying it. I was super glad to hear um, Councilmember Gonzalez bring it up, but it's just such an important, we're going through such a significant demographic shift. The population under 18 is almost the exact opposite of the population over 18 when it comes to demographics. Language is spoken, communities people are coming from, and for those of us who've worked in the K-12 space, the adult community has no idea, and we are so ill prepared for that shift. And so I just really think that starting to think now about how we're understanding that information so that we can get ahead of and address any challenges or problems that may come up from disparities or inequitable outcomes that are unintended but are just because we're not paying attention and being prepared for that. I just think it's good to get that out there. I also like to just ask, and I honestly don't know if there are some public spaces we have restrictions about how we can ask people to get involved and with talking to elected officials and others about supporting this. So I'm curious, are we doing outreach around some of these policies that would be beneficial to AARP or those groups who will most benefit right now from those? I'm getting close. I'm getting close to that card, but but I'm just curious. What are there rules? Are we doing those kinds of things proactively to communicate with those who will most benefit from this right now, because they might be the easiest to empathize?
Mr. Thompson, I'm going to have you answer, and then the regional administrator would like to weigh in. And also, I have to say, I am surprised you don't collect demographic. Being a federally mandated service, we don't. It seems like for schools and everything else, we collect that information.
So, Madam Chair, it's just not, those demographic questions are not part of the application and certification process, so we don't have the information about our customers. So
Mr. Thompson.
then with survey.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, part of it is it has nothing to do with whether they're eligible, and so we can't. It'd be nice, maybe nice to have, but I think we have to do it in other methods in terms of certification. We can talk about language, though. Like we expanded the language, different languages last year. How language and what programs we use, not language line, but what our materials are printed in, is a federal requirement about how that is determined. And so
We did expand that.
we do a review of that on a, I don't know what our frequency basis is, but it's about the number of population within an area of those different languages. And then it's a determination about which languages our materials should be. And so that is frequently updated, not just for us, but any of the public transit providers, Metro Transit, suburban providers would do that. And that's what led to our changes last year, is a survey of that. And then the question about how we've reached out, but maybe I'd say advocates and others, they are very aware of the process. And every bill that I think they have a good network at the legislature about how these bills are. Today we gave the same presentation at the House. There were several people there testifying. Minnesota Council on Disability is an excellent resource that we are talking with all the time, and they're very effective at communicating and bringing these messages forward. And then at the convenings, we'll give a brief discussion about the legislative process, partly because our customers are hearing about it, especially the change for this Metro Mobility budget and requesting that it be moved out. Initially, they're concerned because they don't necessarily understand that. So we want to talk about that this is a good thing for the program and this will help it grow and protect it in the long term. And so we want to talk about these bills because our users, their advocates, they pay attention to all of this and they're always asking. So we build that into our communication as much as we can, and our advocates do too.
So the regional administrator talk about that specific issue, and then I'll call on you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add on the advocacy side, council staff are very careful on advocacy. You all play a little bit different role than we can play. In the last legislative biennium, there were some that felt council staff went too far in advocacy, and they proposed a bill banning the council from advocacy, going so far as removing the fact that our buses say a service of the Metropolitan Council. They wanted that removed. They wanted it to say paid for by the taxpayers, because they felt that was advocating for the council's interests. So we, in an effort to not get slapped on the wrist, we provide factual information about bills. We provide people with information on when they could testify if they wanted to. We don't say we need you to testify in favor of this and we need you pounding the table. You'll see Kate Brickman sends out a Transit at the Capitol email. That Transit at the Capitol email provides, again, just the facts. We certainly say this bill would benefit the council in this way. Or, last session we had to come out and say that a particular bill would have offered a 40% cut to a regular route service. That made a lot of legislators very angry with the council for saying that, but it was a factual piece of information. So we try to do that on the staff side. All of you as council members can be a little more active as you talk to your constituents, as you engage in your communities, as you sort of advocate in your role. But on the staff side, you will find us very measured for those reasons. So.
Councilmember.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things I just thought I would share is in language line, you can get analysis of who's using it and what are the languages and the frequency of those languages used. I was surprised to find that our top 5 languages used in language line at Minneapolis Public Schools were not our top 5 languages. I think our top one was Hindi, which was nowhere on our radar screen in any of the conversations we had about anything related to languages. So I would encourage you to use that analysis. It's super easy to get and can be very informative. But I also would encourage you to look a little more if you have a unique opportunity of having people fill out something to be authorized. And you can always ask for optional information for people to provide while they're in that place. Doesn't have to be connected to their individual record. But I would just encourage you to really think about that. Thank you.
Councilmember Bento.
I'm curious. I live in a townhome complex that isn't an over 55 setting, but it's probably exceeds qualifications to be an over 55. And as someone who's helping up the numbers, I'm always looking at resources I may need in the not too distant future. As part of your outreach, do you go out to community organizations like a townhome complex or a local city sort of event and do informational sessions on Metro Mobility that can be beneficial in helping promote the resources and get people up to speed before it's emergency time?
Ms. Gainan.
Madam Chair, thank you. It's an excellent question, and it's actually a point on the slide earlier that I forgot to cover. We do that as part of our service center tasks. We have site visits and customer education. We typically, it's reactive. They'll call in and they'll ask for information, and we'll connect up and schedule a time that we can come out, provide some information. We don't really promote or do any sort of ridership marketing around that, but we, on a regular basis, a couple times a month, easily, we'll be out in the field.
One more.
Follow-up.
Madam Chair, I've only had 2 experiences in helping connect people with Metro Mobility, and I just want to say from the 2 individuals that I assisted, their experience was excellent. They just felt very good about the timeliness of going through the application process and then the service that they were provided. And in fact, the first individual I assisted was relying on her daughter, who lives about an hour and a half out of the cities. And her daughter was having to come in each week to take her to appointments, and they knew they had to come up with another option. And I was able to help them arrange this. This was several years ago, and the daughter called me and thanked me because it made her life less stressful, and she didn't go through a once-a-week experience of her mother giving her driving directions from the passenger seat. And then the mother called and thanked me because it gave her a reprieve from her daughter quizzing her about whether or not she was taking her meds and whether or not she was locking the door and whether or not. So many times the upside isn't just the ride itself, but the improved relationships, because there's a nice driver there who's going to listen to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, on that note, just this week, Congressman Bento lives in Maplewood. I live in Maplewood. There was a Maplewood resident in the lobby, and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, my dad's moved in with us, and we can get him to his pinochle club, but we can't get him home." And so, but it gets on the families, right? They're doing other things, and then this. I used to work for the Metropolitan area for MAAA, right? Area Agency on Aging. And social isolation is a big issue for seniors, right? And so being able to get out, see other people, and feel like everybody else should. I mean, that's part of it, right? Is getting people around, I think is important. There's nobody else on the list, so we're gonna call it 3-2-1 if you want to get home and drive in the snow, right? Or make sure you get home. Anybody else? Yeah, Mr. Thompson.
Just a reminder that the bus is downstairs outside the garage. So if anybody just wants to do a quick pop in and see what it's like, this is a good opportunity. We don't let you do a ride along with the customers just for data privacy reasons. So this is a good opportunity. So anyway, I'll just be a quick stop. So we'd encourage that if you could.
So down in the garage.
Or right outside there, I think. So,
Yeah, it's right down in the garage, in the covered area.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thanks for everybody for making it, and drive safe on your way home. Good presentation. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Are there times for
Councilmember Anderson.
announcements? I'm looking
Oh,
trying to find the
I
agenda.
forgot.
I'm sorry.
So used
I
to.
might be wrong.
You are right. Still getting into the
disappeared.
groove of the chair. Okay, so reports. Council members. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I do have one.
Okay.
It's a little timely, and a couple of members have asked, so I just want to give a brief update. Chair members, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission met on April 4th. It was my first meeting, and there are a few things to report. One, we're partnering with the Equity Advisory Committee to fill open spaces that many of us learned about during our onboarding, both for the EAC and for the commission, and those will be taking place in April and May. So if you have people, I know a number of you have people who have applied, they should have received information about their interview dates and opportunities. So I just wanted to make sure that you all got a chance to hear that. And if they have not, or you get more questions, talk to your staff people and they'll talk to Emmett. Or you can grab him right now. He's over there. Although I think Katie is also supporting, Driscoll's also supporting on that. Also, the group wanted me to share a couple of pieces of information. One is gratitude in the support for the Equity Grant Program. That's $300,000 that was identified only for capital projects. And their excitement at the potential use for Regional Parks Interest Fund. And there are a few things they wanted that they were really concerned about me liaisoning up the chain. One is that while they're really grateful for the funds, the tie to capital-only projects is problematic, as our own council research and best practices identify that mostly non-capital and programmatic issues cause inequity in park use and regional open space utilization. There was consensus that the Regional Park Interest Earnings Fund could go a long way to supporting advancing equity, and you'll hear more about that coming forward, but they wanted to share that were unanimous in their support for those funds being shared and support or used in that way. They were also shared that it was very important to think about equity issues from a regional perspective, and that not being interested in the implementing agencies just receiving that funds divvied up in a formula, so that there were opportunities to target areas of greatest need and to really address regional equity issues as a region. Frankly, I think to kind of force collaboration, that they saw that addressing these things in a collaborative manner would be very valuable. These topics will be shared at both the Community Development Committee in the future, next couple of months, and the Equity Advisory Council, and that it will come to the full council for information later in this year.
Great, thank you. Good. Anybody else from your committees? Anything you want to, Council Member Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I attended the Lakeville State of the City event this morning, and normally they're sort of dry events, but they did a really fantastic job. They set it up like the dating game, like from the 70s, but it was community partners, so they had our county commissioner, Mary Liz Holberg, they had the superintendent of the Lakeville School District and the head of the Chamber of Commerce. And the mayor, it was asking them questions, and so they were, I mean, they had scripts, but they were sort of feeding in so that he could talk more about new things that are going on with the city, and it was really fun. I was almost disappointed when it was over because it was just so fun to watch. So I'm sure they're going to be posting it online if you guys want to watch it at all, but it was so cool. They've really set the bar high for everybody else for their State of the City events.
Fun, excellent. Anybody else? You know, I will just say as the chair, one, I am amazed at how much you all are out and how much you're doing. When it shows up on that list of where everybody is, I want to say thank you because it's really great to know you're all out there talking with your cities, talking with your organizations. I think it makes a big difference and really helps all of us. After we're next week is the legislative break, right? And then the week after that, before our next meeting, we have the Southwest Light Rail tour. There's 2 different tours, so I hope everybody signed up for that. If you haven't heard, this is the largest capital project in state history, right? Is the Southwest Light Rail. So for me, I'll have to tell you, I've not gone on that tour. I'm trying to understand it because if you're like me, right, people ask you, like, what's happening with this? And you say, well, I'm not exactly sure because I haven't been there, right? And we're going to get continual updates, but this is your chance to get a lay of the land. So I think it's really important. And that'll be, I think, the 22nd and the 25th. Also, there's a number of other things happening. I just wanted to say thanks to the transportation folks for the NCAA efforts. They broke all kinds of records with getting people there and getting them there successfully. There's the soccer stadium open on Saturday, so if you know anybody that's going to go, please tell them to take light rail or ride the A line because we want to make people make sure they get there successfully. So otherwise, I think, is that it? So we have the regional administrator.
I have no report.
Okay. Our council.
No report.
Okay, now anything else? Okay, motion for adjournment.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. A motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That would be